Welcome to Queen City Cyber Consulting's channel. Please like, subscribe, and share.
Welcome back to Queen City Cyber Consulting. As we continue on our journey, either toward, say, certification or toward a job or maybe a promotion. I don't know what the reasons are you're watching some of these videos, but thank you for watching. Today, because this came up in one of my previous videos, the idea of playbooks, and I've already talked about incident response plans. They are two very different creatures. And, we need to be aware of that, not only as, say, a SOC analyst or an incident response analyst, but as an executive, as a member of the board, or a member of HR or the press. It's very, very important to have both. And in fact, you'll have multiple playbooks, and we'll cover playbooks more in depth in another video, by the way. This is just a short, brief video to introduce you to the two different plans and ideas. And since I work in cybersecurity and mostly in consulting these days, I can't tell you how many times I see people in the field that don't really understand that there's a difference here. And that's why I kind of wanted to talk about it. And what it comes down to is governance versus tactics. Governance, more executive level; tactics, more on in those trenches on the front lines. So what you can see is the two different ones laid out here. They call them the two pillars of IR, incident response architecture. So you have your plan, and then you have your playbook. So let's go over the plan here briefly. So the plan is the high level governance structure. It dictates the organization-wide policies and who has the authority to make decisions during this crisis incident. Its audience is typically, like I said, C-suite, legal, PR, HR, insurance brokers. Cyber insurance will ask if you have an incident response plan and then want to see it. Its scope basically governs who has the authority to isolate the network, to take the tactical actions that are recommended to them by the incident response team. It is covered in many compliance documents as well. And if you don't have one and you're not prepared, you could be legally liable if your network has a breach and data gets stolen from you. In fact, there are many cases out there right now in the headlines in the news, companies having to pay millions upon millions of dollars because they failed to do their due diligence to protect the network. That's what part of due diligence is, having an IR plan, testing that IR plan via tabletops, or during the lessons learned after an incident, updating it to make sure it's correct. And it can run any number of ways. I have one that I'll connect, or I'll put a link in eventually to that plan, so you can review it yourself and take a look and see what it looks like. Now, the IR playbook is a little bit different. It's more tactical. It acts as what they call a recipe book, and details what actions should be taken by SOC analysts, security engineers, and digital forensics and incident response specialists. It's oftentimes a step-by-step platform, telling you, for example, what evidence to gather, when chain of custody is needed and necessary, sweeps across the environment, updating your EDR, updating your firewall, things of that nature. So it's a lot more hands-on, a lot more tactical. The mandate for the playbook is to get that attacker dwell time down, stop the lateral movements within your network, and lead to recovery of the network. And it all works hand in hand, kind of like a glove. Each finger has a role to play, and the glove would be the IR plan that holds the fingers of the playbooks together. one good way to think of this. So for the incident response plan, again, its primary focus is corporate governance and strategy, whereas the incident response playbook is technical execution and workflows. Your audiences are different. You have your executives and then your SOC analysts and others. And you can read this for yourself. I'm not going to bore you by reading through it. They use the analogy in the medical field, which I like. I've done it many times in the past. You have an emergency operational plan at a hospital. They have to have one. What happens, say, when the power goes out? What happens when the network goes down? What happens if, heaven forbid, there's an active shooter in the hospital? That's that emergency operation plan. But each one of those would then fall under, say, a playbook. And of course, surgeons would have their own playbooks for surgery, depending on the kind of surgery. So that gives you a good analogy to think of this in. So you've got your governance policy, which is that high level IR plan. Then you need to have your employees, especially your security specialists, map out focus areas. Identify what playbooks you need. Most common ones I've seen are vulnerability analysis, vulnerability patching, malware infection, ransomware infection. Those are some of the big topics. Now, it changes with the environment. For example, if you have cloud or, say, SaaS, security as software, you're going to have a separate playbook for incidents within those environments too. You have to build them out. That's one of the things I do in consulting is help companies build out their playbooks, drawing on my 20 plus years of experience and helping them get it set up. And then working them toward that tabletop simulation where you can validate the playbooks and make sure that they actually fit the environment. I couldn't tell you how many reviews of playbooks that I've done that had the wrong EDR tool or the wrong antivirus tool, or it hadn't been updated in 5 years. Say the contact list for who to call during an emergency, completely out of date. So those need to be reviewed annually to make sure that they are up to date. And they should also be reviewed after every incident, and employment changes all come into play here, because if somebody leaves your company but there's still a contact in your incident response playbook or even your IR plan, well, you've got a problem there because that person no longer exists. There's somebody else in that role and you can't make contact with them. Let's build it out. Learn more about the difference between an IR plan and an IR playbook. And like I said, I'll be doing a more in-depth video on playbooks and what to look for and how to write them in the future. I hope you enjoyed this brief review. Again, this is Queen City Cyber Consulting signing off. Have a great day.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.